The navigator was a second lieutenant.
Those are all a bunch of babies,
Yes.
you know, in that
Well,
perspective.
you got to start out someplace.
Yes, sir. And then your Togalier, was he a buck sergeant or was he?
Buck sergeant.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I can't tell you where our first mission was, but I think that it was just over into the Netherlands a little bit, and
Okay.
it was basically a milk run.
Yeah, I was going to ask, did they give you a milk run on your first combat mission?
Well, I don't know that either, but that's what we had.
Okay. You didn't get shot at.
I know that one of the early targets that we went to was in Cologne, in Germany, to bomb a bridge.
Okay. That was not a milk run.
No. And it didn't wreck the bridge.
Okay.
So we had to go back
Go back.
another time to wreck the bridge, and we didn't wreck it. It was a bridge that you couldn't wreck. You could bomb it and make it unusable, but the bridge was still there, and all they had to do was fill up the holes and start driving over it again. So it was all heavy concrete, I think.
I was, there's one double check. You kind of like we talked about the mission to the Netherlands, and I kind of did you incur any fighters at all? Did Luftwaffe intercept you at all on that mission?
In all of the combat missions we flew, our crew, we were never attacked by German fighters.
Okay.
Any operations against us that we had was all ground flak.
It's all pretty much flak. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And I think that we might have, our group might have had fighter attacks while I was in the combat status
Okay.
on missions that I was not on. I don't know that.
Okay.
So.
All right. But any mission you went on, you never encountered any Luftwaffe.
That's right.
Okay. Yours was you only had you dealt with flak, which was just as bad. And could you explain it? Because we use this kind of like this term, this milk run. What does it mean to have a milk run flight?
It means that we didn't get any opposition that was particularly dangerous.
Okay. All right. Because I've heard that phrase before, and that's what I kind of understand. It means that it's almost like a training flight, but it's a real combat flight. But it's a low risk flight. That there's little risk of any Luftwaffe and little risk of the flak, encountering flak, so to speak.
Well, it means
won't be intense like.
It means that it turned out to be that way.
Yes.
It wasn't necessarily planned that way.
You didn't know that, but it turned out that way. Okay. All right. So I want to get. All right. So you went and did Cologne, maybe the next one or two missions, and then you had to go back and do it another time. Okay.
I think that's what we did. Now I'm not sure about that, and I'll have to look at the list of targets that our crew had, and that's in the records for the 388th and
okay, yeah, the 560th.
Yeah.
Do you remember? Do you remember the tail number of your airplane by chance? Were you assigned a specific one?
No.
Did you get one specifically? No.
We were not assigned one. I have to tell you the story.
Okay.
We flew a few missions, and we always ended up with going out almost in the middle of the night, dark. And one of my jobs was to talk to the crew chief and find out what the status of his airplane was.
Okay.
So I was doing this one time, and I asked him about it, and he said that was his airplane. He fixed it. He made sure it was just right to go, and he didn't have to worry about that at all, because he says, if I don't say it's all right, it don't fly, because that's my airplane.
Okay.
So I started out, and he called me back, and he said, I want you to be careful of that airplane and try not to get it all full of bullet holes and everything. I thought he was kidding, and he wasn't. He said if that's not something you can do anything about except to maybe shoot the other airplanes, you know, and hit them so that they don't get close enough to put holes in his airplanes. Well, you know,
Okay.
I didn't know what to think about that, and I walked out and he called me back again. And he says, well, I'm kind of serious about that, and in particular, I want you to be careful about the fuel tanks. Make sure you don't get them shot full of holes. He said, your crew has a reputation for bad wrecking the fuel tanks, and the engineering officer doesn't give us enough time or help really to get the new fuel tanks in and for the next mission that's going to go on. So you be careful about that. So
Okay.
I said I would, and off I went, and I had a lot of stuff to do to get ready to fly, you know. And it just kept puzzling me.
Bugging you, huh?
This was a very unusual conversation with a guy I didn't know. You know, so.
Well, because it's his airplane, and you guys got a reputation.
Well,
So your gunners aren't doing a very good job.
He was telling me it's not the pilot's.
Yeah.
It's not the pilot's airplane like it is in the movies.
Right.
It was his airplane,
It's his
and he says when and when not. It took me a couple of days to figure that out.
Yeah.
The first thing was that I said to myself, I went through all of that training in Amarillo, and I learned all about the fuel system, how you put fuel in. There was a way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
How to drain the water off of the bottom of the fuel tank
Right.
before you put it up in the air.
Because the water is heavier than fuel, right?
Yeah, and that's
So
all
it's-
down there, and before
you
you just turn and let the water come out, and when it's gasoline, we shut the fuel tank thing off.
All right.
I said that they, to my recollection, they never talked about replacing fuel tanks. And then it occurred to me that the only reason you would replace a fuel tank is you've got bullet holes in it. And the bullet holes would have to be from outside of the wing someplace and come out the other side of the wing.
Right.
So you'd be able to see those bullet holes. I never seen them. So this bothered me for a couple of days, and I finally decided here's what it was. Here was this guy, he was very proud of his airplane, that's the first thing. And he knew exactly what he was doing. And he didn't like to have a 19-year-old tech sergeant in there asking him if he really knew what he was doing, and if he was, if he wanted to be sure that I was doing a good job of fixing his airplane. So.
Right.
But at the same time, I knew that he was very conscious of the fact that I was the one that was taking it over into Germany and bringing it back,
Yes,
you know, and he wasn't.
He was.
I just want to tell you this story because I sure grew up in a hurry that day.
Yes, sir. Want to make sure you're doing your job right.
Well,
Stay focused. Yeah.
I learned where I belonged in the pecking order.
There we go.
So.
That's
Anyhow, I grew up and I became a man that day.
all right.
That I should be showing a little more respect for what he was doing when I asked him those questions.
Yes, sir.
Anyhow,
Well, you want to make sure that plane was going to get up there and come back. And he was letting you know he's responsible for that plane to do that very function, and he does it well. And he
yes,
doesn't need some little pipsqueak like you challenging him on that.
that's right.
That's
And
what
at
it
the
was.
same time, the pipsqueak was the one that was doing the heavy work with the airplane when it was up in the air. So, you know. Anyhow,
All right, so I kind of get that, yeah.
I had to tell you that story because
Yeah.
that's where I really grew up as
where
a
you grew up.
soldier.
And
And
you
before
realized
that, I was just a punky kid. You
Yes,
know.
sir. Did you become more compliant at that point? Remember we talked about that earlier?
I guess so, yeah. I was a little easier to get along with.
Okay. All right.
We flew on several missions that we got separated from the crew, and I don't understand why. I think maybe once we had lost an engine, but maybe for other reasons we got separated.
Okay, you fell out of the group formation?
I don't remember all of that in particular, but there were times when the pilot asked the navigator where we were or what direction we ought to be going to get home. And he says, check, and I'll check it and figure out and let you know. And we could hear this on the interphone, you know. One time he was complaining about the fire, the engine right outside of his nose desk in the airplane. It was about ready to start on fire. He was seeing the red hot exhaust string, you know, through maybe some little holes or something there, or where there was an opening. And he complained about that and said that we ought to be doing something about that. And I went down and I told him that those were supposed to be red hot. I said, in fact, if they're not red hot, we got a problem, and you ought to be reporting that right away.
Okay.
And I went back to my position, and he complained about them because they were still red hot.
Okay. What were the gauges showing on? Do you remember in that incident with the gauges?
They were normal.
They're all in the green, sir. Let's keep going. Okay. Did you ever get convinced that it was okay for those to be red hot? It just happened to be the first time you ever noticed
I told the lieutenant, I told the pilot, I said, you know, I've got all of my enlisted men back in the back end of the airplane. They're listening to all this conversation. There's nothing wrong with that engine. It's just doing very fine. And would you please tell the navigator, tell the lieutenant navigator to keep his mouth shut.
Because he's wearing the guys in the back.
Well, it might have been the next trip or two, and we got pretty well shot up.
Okay.
I don't remember where we went, but we were trying to fly across France on 2 engines. I've had people ask me if the B-17 flew on 2 engines, and I said, well, it does if you throw everything that's out that's movable, except the people.
Yeah.
Because that's what we were doing.
Yes, sir.
And not very well, because it took an awful lot of gas to run those things.
Yes, sir. Do you remember what date that was? About what time that was? On this particular mission?
No.
Do you remember which mission number it was that y'all had been on? Like how many combat missions did you ultimately end up getting done?
The crew got 23, I got 22. I had hurt my back one time,
Okay.
so I missed one of the flights.
So you were on 22 combat missions, and this was one of those before you got to 22?
Yeah, oh yes.
Okay. So you got some flack.
Well, it was one of the early ones. It was.
Oh, it was one early.
It was probably still in January.
Oh,
I'm guessing.
Oh, okay.
We ended up having a crash landing in a field out in France and kind of Normandy, up pretty close to the coast.
Okay.
Because we didn't have enough fuel to get across the channel.
Okay.